Hey, how's it going? Today I'm going to be talking about layers, groups, and frames in Figma. I'll also go over overflow content in frames. There's some really cool techniques you can do with that, but this video is great for beginners, and even if you're an intermediate or advanced, it'd be good to refresh up on. If you're a beginner though, I suggest you follow along with everything I do, as it will get you familiar with Figma, and yeah, hope you enjoy it. Alright, so I'm here in Figma, and I'm going to go ahead and go to the top right and hit Design File. Next, I'm just going to name this, I'll do layers, groups, and then frames. I'm going to then go to the top left to the region tools and grab the frame. I'm going to go to the right and hit Desktop. Don't worry about what this is exactly, it's just creating us a workplace and a canvas to work in. This frame is. Next, I'm going to go to the shapes and grab us any we want. Now, anything I added this is a layer. So this, what I just added, is a layer. Anything I'm going to add to the canvas is a layer. I can grab a polygon per se, and this is also a layer. I can add text, so if I was to go hello world, that is also a layer. If I add images, anything, it's going to be a layer to this. Now these layers have set properties to them to the right, so there's alignment over here, there's XY coordinates, width, height, the rotation, the corners, so which is border radius, so if I do 30, it'd see it rounded out the corners. We have constraints, which I'll go over in a little bit, and then we have layer, which is just like blending options when layers overlap. So if I was to put this underneath the rectangle, and then right now it's on pass through, but if I was to set that to like let's see, on difference, you see how it acts. It's just, you can just play around with it and get an idea. Yeah, and then we have fill, which we can change the color of our object or our layer, and then there's some other properties and we can fool with. One thing to note about layers is sometimes they're not always referred to as a layer. You may hear it as an object, so I'm moving this object or I'm moving this element. So don't let that confuse you. They're all just layers. The next thing I want to mention is the order of layers. So the layers on the top left right here, we see that the order is going to matter. So for example, we have the rectangle on the bottom and we have the polygon right here. What is going to happen if I put the polygon on top of the rectangle? Well, it's going to sit on top of the rectangle because it's sitting on top of the rectangle in the order. Now what happens if I put the polygon under the rectangle? Now it's gone because the rectangle is sitting on top of the triangle. So keep that in mind, the order does matter. One other thing I forgot to mention is about the properties. Each thing is going to have unique properties. So for example, text is going to have things unique to that. You can bold it, font, etc. This rectangle won't have polygon options. So like here, we can adjust like this and we can change our polygon, whereas the rectangle didn't. So each thing was going to have like unique properties set to it. Alright, and then the next thing I want to talk about is the naming. So when it comes to naming your layers, you want to be descriptive but concise. Don't leave a text. For example, if this rectangle was we don't want to leave it as rectangle 1. We could like say it was a heading section. We could just name it a heading. It's concise, it's clear, it's to the point. This is good because when you're sharing this with teammates or you're sending this off to stakeholders or whatever, you want them to be able to understand it and see what you're doing and not feel confused. The other thing too is I wouldn't recommend naming when you're first starting out, like creating your project or your ideating, because you're going to end up changing a lot of things in the ideating process, and it's just going to waste a lot of time, and it'd be smarter to wait until you complete your design to start naming things. So that's what I would recommend to do. But to wrap it up, layers are just objects or anything you add to your frame. They're like the building blocks to a house. So anything you add to this is a layer. Alright, so I'm going to begin talking about groups. Now if you look over here at these circles, I want you to imagine that they're social media links. So for example, this one could be YouTube. I'm just going to rename one so you know what I mean. So for example, I can name this one YouTube, and I could name these, but I'm not going to. Now if I move them, you see they move by themselves. They're not grouped. Now it would make a lot of sense to group these together as they're all social media links and they all serve the same purpose, and it just makes sense to have them together. So we can do that in Figma. We can hold Control, drag, and we can either hit right click and then hit group selection, or we can hit Control G. Now you see I've created a group and it moves together as one. And if you look in the top left, you can also see that I have group 1 right here. And if I expand this, you see what makes up this group. Now what has happened is it's created a top level layer with each of these little sub layers inside of this. This is good because over here it can make things a lot clearer, because you can imagine if I didn't group anything, it would be a mess over here. Whereas if I group things, it can make it a lot clearer. So I can name this, for example, to just social links. You don't even have to know what's in here to understand that. There's probably going to be, you know, social links in here, and it just makes it a lot clearer than having everything just a mess. Now, this, as you can see when I hover over it, we can see the bounds. So the bounds are the blue rectangle, that is the bounds of the group. And the bounds of a group are determined by the child elements. So you see it fits around the child elements. Now what happens if I resize the group? The child elements grow with the group. One thing to note is this does not apply to effects, strokes, or type size, which I'm about to show. Now if I wanted to get rid of this group, say I didn't mean to do this, this is non-destructive, meaning that this is not a permanent. We can ungroup this if we didn't mean to. So we can right click and we can ungroup, or we can hit Control Shift G and you see it's ungrouped. Now we no longer need this, so I'm just going to delete all these items and we're going to move on to this. Now you see here we have a square and then we have text. Now I'm going to group these as they're not grouped right now. I'm going to hit Control, I'm going to drag, right click, and I'll just hit group. Now I have created a group and we can see what makes up this group. Alright, now say I'm wanting to resize this. We know that type size is not going to be affected by this. And as I do this, you can see it's not moving, it's not scaling with it. Now, if I want to scale with it, there's a little tool up here called the scale tool. So if I go up here and hit scale, now if I drag it, you see it scales. So yeah, and one thing about this, when we're not scaling and the behavior of this resizing, you could apply constraints to it, but you don't want to apply constraints to groups. You would rather want to use a frame when doing that. And yeah, so to cover groups real quick, when you're wanting to combine similar items together, you want to make them into a group. And for example, if you want to have resize behavior of some sort, you can also create a group. And that pretty much wraps up groups. Alright, so for frames, I went ahead and added these 3 layers. We already know what these are. And then I'm going to add a frame. So if we go over here, we can click the frame tool, or the shortcut is F. I'm going to draw us a little box like this, and I'm going to change the color to gray. Now, all a frame is a container, and it's a container where your design lives. So we see that we have this white frame right here, and it's our highest level top frame, and that's where our design's going to live. And I put another frame right here as well. Now, I can add layers to this frame. So I'm going to add this triangle, I'm going to add this circle, I'm going to add this square to the frame. Now they're going to move together, similar to a group. We also see in the top left that it kind of looks like a group, as each layer is inside of this frame. The difference is the behavior though. So we know that with a group, when we resize the group, the elements are going to grow with the group, as long as it's not a type size or effect or a stroke. So yeah, the frame is going to behave completely different, as a frame is completely independent from a child. Meaning that when we resize that frame, the children elements are not going to be affected whatsoever. And I'll show this right now. So you see, when I stretch this frame out, the child elements, nothing changes. Now, this is where constraints can come into play. So if I click on like the rectangle here and go to the right, I can set this constraint to, let's just do bottom right. We'll do the circle. We'll also do right, bottom, and then we'll do this one. We can just leave this one where it is. So all a constraint is how these elements inside of a frame are going to behave when the size of the frame changes. So we can assign it behavior. So watch what happens now. As I stretch this frame, these two are going to the bottom right. This is staying where it is because I didn't change the constraint. Now, if I resize this back and I click on the triangle and I change the triangle to center, now we know that this is going to move to the center as I resize, which that is what it's doing. As these go to the bottom right, this is moving to the center. Yeah. If we want this to behave more like a group, we can go up here to the scale tool, and as we drag this, we see it all scales kind of similar to a group. But yeah, you really want to use a frame when you want like responsiveness, design, and things like that. If you're needing use a constraint on a group, don't do that. Use a frame instead. Something else about frames I want to bring up is if we click on the frame and we see we have the blue box highlighted, we can go here and we can create a component. Now, frames and components are almost identical in the way that they behave. All a component is just allows us to create a reusable piece of functionality or design that we can use somewhere else. So it can be very time saving. So for example, if this was like, you know, social media links and I'm adding this to everything I'm creating, it makes a lot more sense to create just one component and reuse that instead of creating this each time, as that would waste a lot of time. So if we go to the assets here, we can see this component I just created, and if I drag this here, we can reuse it, and we can reuse this anywhere. So it's very good. It can save a lot of time. There's some other things you can do with frames, and I'm going to go ahead and get into those. Alright, so I've created this frame right here, and it's made up of a circle and text. So there's pretty neat things we can do when this content overflows. So when the content goes outside of the bounds of the frame. First of all, if we want to hide it, we want to go to our frame and we want to turn on clip content. So now that when the circle goes outside of it, out of the bounds, it will be clipped. As you see, it's being clipped like so. It's still there and we can see that it's there, but we just can't see it. This is useful for design. So for example, I could make this circle bigger like so, and I could put it right here, and that's a design we can do. We can also show this content. So we can go up here and turn off clip content, and the content is shown. That's also another design technique we can do with overflow content. So those are probably the two simplest ways you can use overflow content. Alright, so the next method is to reveal additional content. What I've done first is created a group that is a rectangle, and inside that rectangle there's text and there's an upside down triangle. Underneath this is a frame. So once I expand this frame, it reveals the additional content. So this is a technique we can do to act as if we were to hit this button. This is what it would look like as we go down. All I've done was added some lines and some text, and we could keep expanding this and adding more stuff to it if we'd want to. So that's just a method you can do if you want to add additional content to your page. Alright, so here I'm going to show you how to scroll on content in a prototype. So what I've done is I've started off with a frame that is an iPhone 14 over here. Whoops, I accidentally made another, but we have this frame, and what I've done is I've put these squares with different shapes in them inside of this frame. This is overflow content, and we want all this content to be inside of a frame. So what we're going to do is hold Control, and we're going to select all these, and we're going to hit Control Alt G, and that threw all these into a frame. Next, what we're going to want to do is shrink this frame to the size of our viewport. So our viewport is right there. It's just the size of this main frame. Next, what we're going to want to do is we're going to want to click on the viewport frame. We're going to go to prototype, and not prototype, sorry. We're going to go to clip content, and now that the content is clipped, we're going to go back to the content frame, this one, and we're going to go to prototype, and we're going to set the overflow, which is just the overflowing content, where it's default set to no scrolling, but we want that to horizontally scroll. So now that we've clicked that, we can go up here and we can click the prototype button. It's going to load our prototype, and now we can horizontally scroll. And what it has done is created a free scroll that lets us look at the content. There's a lot of different methods we can do with this. We can create a carousel if we wanted to, but for this we just created a free scroll. Alright, I think I've went over everything. We went over layers, frames, groups, and overflow content. We got to see just how powerful overflow content is, and we only scratched the surface. So I really recommend you watch more videos on it, as it's good to know, and there's just so much you can do with it. If you enjoyed this video, or if you have any questions, please leave them down below. I'll get back with you. And yeah, also, if you're struggling with this at all, I highly suggest you follow along with this video. Follow along with any video you watch, because it's always good just to play with it yourself. And because it's one thing to watch something and then, you know, go do it and then you forget it and not know how to do it. So definitely follow along if you can. And yeah, if you like these videos, I'll make more. And thanks for watching.